A charming woman. A charming woman. Not a mister. Really? In her deep brown eyes there lurked pleased surprise, struggling with wonder. She looked from myself to a friend who had introduced us with a bewitching smile of incredulity mixed with hope. He assured her, adding laughingly, "The only genuine and original," and left us. "I've always thought of you as a sad middle-aged man," she said, with a delicious "I've always thought of you as a sad middle-aged man," she said with a delicious little laugh, then added in low, soft tones, "I'm so very pleased to meet you, really." The words were conventional, but her voice crept round on one like a warm caress. "Come and talk to me," she said, seating herself upon a small couch and making room for me. I sat down awkwardly beside her, my head buzzing just a little, as with one glass too many of champagne. I was in my literary childhood, one small book and a few essays and criticisms scattered through various obscure periodicals had been as yet my only contribution to current literature. The sudden discovery that I was the Mr. Anybody and that charming woman thought of me and were delighted to meet me was a brain-disturbing draught. "And it was really you who wrote that clever book? And it was really you who wrote this clever book?" she continued. "And all those brilliant things in the magazines and journals? Oh, it must be delightful to be clever." She gave breath to a little sign of vain regret that went to my heart. To console her, I commenced a labored compliment, but she stopped me with her fan. To console her, I commenced a labored compliment, but she stopped me with her fan. On after reflection, I was glad she had. It would have been one of those things better expressed otherwise. "I know what you are going to say," she laughed, "but don't. Besides, from you I should not know quite how to take it. You can be so satirical." I tried to look as though I could be, but in her case would not. She let her ungloved hand rest for an instant upon mine. Had she left it here for two, I should have gone down on my knees before her. I have stood on my head at her feet, have made a fool of myself in some way or another before the whole room full. She timed it to a nicety. "I don't want you to pay me compliments," she said. "I want us to be friends. Of course, in years I'm old enough to be your mother. By the register, I should say she might have been 32, but looked 26. I was 23, and I fear foolish for my age. But you know the world, and you are so different to the other people one meets. Society is so hollow and artificial, don't you find it so? You don't know how I long sometimes to get away from it, to know someone to whom I could show my real self, who would understand me. You will come and see me sometimes. I'm always at home on Wednesdays, and let me talk to you, won't you? And you must tell me all your clever thoughts." It occurred to me that maybe she would like to hear a few of them there and then, but before I had got well started in hollow society, a hollow society man came up and suggested supper, and she was compelled to leave me. As she disappeared, however, in the front, she looked back over her shoulder with a glance half pathetic, half comic that I understood. It said, "Pity me, I've got to be bored by this shallow creature." And I did. I sought her through all the rooms before I went. I wished to assure her of my sympathy and support. I learned, however, from the butler that she had left early, in company with the hollow society man. A fortnight later, I ran against a young literary friend in Regent Street, and we lunched together at the Monica. "I met such a charming woman last night," he said. A Mrs. Clifton Courtney, a delightful woman." "Oh, do you know her?" I exclaimed. "Oh, we're old friends. She's always wanting me to go and see her. I really must." "Oh, I didn't know you knew her," he answered. Somehow the fact of my knowing her seemed to lessen her importance in his eyes. But soon he recovered his enthusiasm for her. "A wonderfully clever woman," he continued. "I'm afraid I disappointed her a little, for—" He said this, however, with a laugh that contradicted his words. She would not believe I was the Mr. Smith. She imagined from my book that I was quite an old man. I could see nothing in my friend's book myself to suggest that the author was, of necessity, anything other 18. The mistake appeared to me to display want of acumen, but it had evidently pleased him greatly. "I felt quite sorry for her," he went on, "chained to that bloodless artificial society in which she lives. You can't tell," she said to me, "how I long to meet someone to whom I could show my real self, who would understand me. I am going to see her on Wednesday." I went with him. My conversation with her was not as confidential as I had expected, owing to there being some 80 other people present in the room intended for the accommodation of 8. But after sojourning round for an hour in aimless misery, as very young men at such caverns do, knowing, as a rule, only the man who has brought them, and being unable to find him, I contrived to get a few words with her. She greeted me with a smile, in the light of which I at once forgot my past discomfort, and let her fingers rest with delicious pressure for a moment upon mine. "How good of you to keep your promise," she said. "These people have been tiring me so. Sit here and tell me all you have been doing." She listened for about 10 seconds, and then interrupted me with, "And that clever friend of yours that you came with, I met him at dear Lady Lennon's last week. Has he written anything?" I explained to her that he had. "Tell me about it," she said. "I get so little time for reading, and then I only care to read the books that help me." And she gave me a grateful look, more eloquent than words. I described the work to her, and wishing to do my friend justice, I even recited a few of the passages upon which, as I knew, he especially prided himself. One sentence in particular seemed to lay hold of her. "A good woman's arms round a man's neck is a life-belt thrown out to him from heaven. How beautiful!" she murmured. "Say it again." I said it again, and she repeated it after me. Then a noisy old lady swooped down upon her, and I drifted away into the corner, where I tried to look as if I were enjoying myself and failed. Later on, feeling it time to go, I sought my friends and found him talking to her in a corner. I approached and waited. They were discussing the latest Eastern murder. A drunken woman had been killed by her husband, a hard-working artisan who had been maddened by the ruin of his home. "Ah," she was saying, "what power a woman has to drag a man down or to lift him up. I never read a case in which a woman is concerned without thinking of those beautiful lines of yours. A good woman's arms round a man's neck is a lifebelt thrown out to him from heaven. Out to him from heaven." Opinions differed concerning her religion and politics, said the low church person. "An earnest Christian woman, sir, of that unostentatious type that has always been the foundation of our church. I am proud to know that woman, and I am proud to think that poor words of mine have been the humble instrument to avert the true woman's heart of the frivolities of fashion, and to fix her thoughts upon higher things. A good churchwoman, sir, a good churchwoman in the best sense of the word," said the pale, aristocratic-looking young ebb to the Comtesse, the light of all-world enthusiasm shining from his deep-set eyes. "I have great hopes of our dear friend. She finds it hard to sever the ties of time and love. We are all weak, but her heart turns toward our Mother Church, as a child, brought up upon strangers, yearns, after many years, for the bosom that has borne it. You have spoken, and I, even I, may be the voice in the wilderness, leading the lost sheep back to the fold. Colonel Maxim always spoke of her as a fair pillar of the state." "With the enemy in our midst," said the old soldier, "it is right and proper for every true man, and every true woman, to defend the country, and all honors right to noble ladies such as Mr. Clinton Courtney, who laying aside their natural shrinking from publicity, come forward in such a crisis as the present to combat the forces of disorder and disloyalty." But, some listener would suggest, I gathered from young Coulson that Mr. Clifton Courtney held somewhat advanced views on social and political questions. "Jocelyn," the colonel would reply with scorn, "bah! They may have been a short space of time during which the fellow's long hair and winely rhetoric impressed her. But I flatter myself I put my spoke in Mr. Jocelyn's wheel. Why, damn, sir, she consented. Why, damn, sir, she consented to stand with Grantham of the Bermondsey branch of a Primus Lake next year. What Jocelyn say to that, the scoundrel?" What Jocelyn said was, "I know the woman is weak, but I do not blame her. I pity her. When the time comes, as soon it will, when woman is no longer a puppet dancing to the threats held some brainless man, when a woman is not threatened with social rejection is not threatened with social rejections for daring to follow her own conscience instead of that of her nearest male relative, then will be the time to judge her. It is not for me to betray the confidence reposed in me by a suffering woman, but you can tell that interesting old fossil, Colonel Maxim, that he and the other old woman of Bermondsey branch of the Primrose League may elect Mrs. Clinton Courtney for their president, and make the most of it. They have only got the outside of the woman. Her heart is beating time to the tramp of a onward marching people. Her soul's eyes are straining for the glory of a coming dawn. Her heart is beating time to the tramp of an onward marching people. Her soul's eyes are straining for the glory of a coming dawn. But they all agreed that she was a charming woman.